Thank you again for joining me on the Southern Report and giving me the privilege of your time. It's the 20th of January. It's the inauguration of President Donald Trump, and there has also been other events that have been ongoing with all the ramifications of that for the world. And one of the best people to talk to with his incredible legal brain as well, and that's very, very important, is my dear friend John Haller. And I'm going to bring John on and we can talk about what's going on. John, hello, my friend. How are you?
I'm sort of awake. We talked late last night for me and early this morning for you. So I will try to keep my yelling to a minimum this morning. I'm suffering from a bit of inauguration Martin Luther King Day rage.
I I hear you, sir. I've written a few things down which we said we want to try and cover. So you said to me that you would like to start with the pardons, and I think your legal brain in explaining that and how that works, that would be a good place to start.
Okay, so this morning, so this is being taped a few hours before Trump is to be sworn in. The word I've not had a chance to read the text of them, but I'm pretty sure. I mean, look, the people that are involved with the Biden administration, the people who are actually running the show, not Joe Biden, are issuing themselves pardons on the way out the door, which we all expected. We know that Hunter was there. I expect the entire Biden family to be receiving pardons before noon today when Joe Biden's authority is terminated. It's been a very, very strange transition. So what today, all of the people involved with the January 6th committee have been pardoned by Joe Biden. Anthony Fauci has been pardoned. Former, I don't know, Joint Chief of Staff Mark Milley,
yes,
has been pardoned. Now, in some respects, I want to say this, that I'm not sure that it was an easy thing to go after these people. But I know you and I talked about this a while ago, that the people on the right that were talking about revenge and all this other stuff needed to shut up. Because when they said that, they triggered a reason for pardons. Now, certainly, if someone has been convicted of a crime, they can be pardoned. But one of the reasons why a pardon is issued is to protect people against prosecution and protect people against rogue prosecutions is also, that's a valid reason for issuing a pardon. So the fact that some people have been pardoned should not be interpreted as an admission that they were guilty. I disagree very, very, and I've seen this posted all over the place within the last hour after these pardons were announced. Defending yourself against a criminal prosecution, and I did some white collar criminal prosecution, whether it's valid or not, is incredibly expensive. So, for example, in connection with the J6 or challenges to the last election in 2020, a lot of, there have been a number of attorneys who represented Trump in those prosecutions, and a number of them pled guilty to some state charges. That's something else we need to talk about, because they were, and I know some of these people, or know people that know them very well. They were already and incurred hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees. These cases are incredibly complex. I've been involved in discussions with people where you talk to someone, would you represent this person in a case? and they say, yeah, and we start, the retainer is $2 million. Now, not a lot of people can do that. And we know you've done great work on J6 people that were tried. Even if they weren't tried, they've been subjected to having to get attorneys and prosecutions, and many of them have been bankrupted. So I'm sure you have places where people can go to contribute to that. So what two things? So Biden is pardoning, like Fauci, the J6 committee, people like Liz Cheney, against any prosecution or crimes related to that, with one exception that he cannot pardon them for. So he cannot pardon them for against state prosecution. So, for example, when Trump comes into office today, we are hopeful that there will be pardons issued for a number of people, including some or all of the J6 people, which Trump mentioned in his rally yesterday in Washington, D.C. that those pardons that he issues today, let's be blunt, they could have been issued between January 6th and noon on January 20th, 2021. All of those people could have been pardoned. But that wasn't done because I think sometimes the Republican side of the aisle has trouble conceiving of what the other side has planned. And we're in a very, very strange situation here in the U.S. where the justice system has been weaponized. But back to lawyers defending Trump in prosecuting claims regarding the procedures, regarding the thing that's used to select or elect a president back in 2020. Some of those charges were brought in state court. Trump himself was brought up on these ridiculous charges in New York State court. Even the New York Court of Appeals thinks that they're insane. He was found guilty. The judge pronounced a sentence, so he would be found guilty a week ago Friday, before he was sworn in, so that they could always say, oh, the first convicted felon takes office as president of the United States. Trump cannot pardon himself. I think he could pardon himself, by the way, just as Biden can pardon himself out. And I think that might be coming later today in the next couple of hours. Trump could have pardoned himself of all federal crimes, but not state crimes. So the New York case stays, just like the Georgia prosecutions against John Eastman and others stays. And by the way, those cases are still somewhat active, even though the prosecutor's been kicked off the case. But they were show trials. This is what they do in Colombia and other third world countries. Pot dictatorships. So Trump could have pardoned all these people 4 years ago. Let's be very blunt about that. But that didn't happen. And we know that the devastation that's been wreaked on people who were simply, in many cases, exercising their First Amendment rights have been bankrupted in many cases, and people in jail and that type of thing. So what Biden did today, Trump could have done 4 years ago. So pardons are not just issued once you've been found guilty or you are guilty of a crime. They are to protect you against rogue prosecutions. I mean, for example, we saw that in the early days of the Trump administration. They came after General Mike Flynn.
Yeah.
And he was pardoned. Okay, but he spent a good part of all the accumulated life savings that he had defending himself. And so what people don't understand a lot of times in our legal system here in the United States, you pay your own legal fees. So there's nowhere you go to get that money back. You can be prosecuted, you can defend yourself, you can be exonerated, you can be found not guilty, the charges can be dismissed, but you don't get your money back. And so now there's also the issue of whether The people who were acting on the J6 committee might have had some kind of legislative immunity. That would be something that would have to have been litigated down the road. So I just want people to say, just because a pardon is, I don't think it's a good argument to say, well, he was pardoned, he must have been guilty. That's not necessarily the right way to analyze that. Whether they're guilty or not, that's a separate issue. Okay. The issue is to protect people from prosecution, and the costs of being prosecuted are just absolutely crushing. They will bankrupt very wealthy people. And
I
I've seen
suppose, I suppose, John, and you've seen that. Sorry, I suppose, John, that we're seeing that with the comments made to Pam Bondi in her nomination. This whole thing of her saying, "Well, I'm trying to bring the law back. We're trying to center to the point where we're not going to we don't want to weaponize the law again." Which is going to be interesting. Sorry if that sounds a very simple way of viewing it. And I was going to say, the other thing is, when you say about Trump being able to pardon everyone from Jan 6, 2021, in some sense, how would that have worked out? Would you have said that every single person that was then accused of going into the Capitol building, of doing this, that, and the other, they would be pardoned for whatever actions? What are the practicalities of that?
Well, that you do raise an issue, because I believe that if it came down to, so let's say Trump had issued a blanket pardon for everyone who might have been present in D.C. involved in these protests, of the next thing would have been, okay, now we have an issue as to whether that pardon is actually effective. Does it need to name the individual specifically? Because what's usual, and I've worked with this office in the past, or had contacts with them, each president within the White House counsel's office, it's like a law firm. So you have the Attorney General, which is Department of Justice, which is prosecution and representing the government in litigation, whether bringing cases or defending cases. The Department of Justice, by the way, Pam Bondi will oversee about 9,000 lawyers. Right. If that was a separate law firm, that would be the largest law firm in the world.
Yes.
Yes. I'm not aware of any that have that many. There's some that have 5, 6, 7,000, but the Department of Justice itself oversees 8,000 or 9,000 lawyers. So I forget what the point I was going to make. So the argument would be, well, you have to be specific. You have to name the individual specifically. And so within the White House counsel's office, there will be an office of pardons, and you would go, and the general procedure is you go and request it. This has been the way it's been until the Democratic side decided to weaponize the justice system against everybody. You would normally go, you would fill out an application, and then there would be lawyers that would review it. There would be maybe a meeting and that type of thing. It could be a very lengthy procedure. Biden is short-circuiting that by doing this. He's taking away all of that, with people getting pardons that haven't even requested them. So I'm sure that I don't know everybody on the January J6 committee. That would be
Adam Schiff,
Liz Cheney, Adam Schiff, Jamie Raskin, all of those people, and then the other guy, Republican and name only guy, who was also on that didn't run for re-election. I'm sure they're all on the list. I haven't seen the exact list, but I'm sure that there will be more coming in the next 2 hours and 40 minutes. This 9:20 a.m. Eastern time here. So Trump sworn in at noon. This has been a very, very strange transition. I'm 70 years old. I've watched this. I've been I followed politics ever since I was a kid. I've never seen one like this. This one is bizarre. For example, yesterday Trump was at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. That usually is done after the president is sworn in. This is the first time I'm aware of that it's ever been done before he's sworn in. It would not be unusual. A lot of people were making, Air Force One went and picked Trump up and flew him to Washington, D.C. That's very common. That's done all the time. Just like, Air Force One or Two may take the Bidens back to Delaware. And by the way, I would go drive them myself if asked.
Good for you. I think there'd be a long queue for that job, John.
Yeah, or get them an Uber. Maybe I'll just pay for the Uber to get them back to DC to Delaware.
Well, the we've seen the furniture come out, and I thank you for a bit of brevity there, John, and your humour. But you're absolutely. We could do a poll and guess how many people would have done that drive. But this is very, very. It's very, very important. This is your skill, your job, this is your wheelhouse in explaining the legal system. And then you've said a very important point of how that has been weaponized. I mean, we've all seen the shots of Merrick Garland getting into his big Dodge or whatever after coming out of his particular building of office and everyone waving him goodbye. But you've touched on the important thing.
Well, those videos would be helpful to know who to fire.
Yeah.
Identify, get some facial recognition going, and AI those videos and find out who it was that was so distressed with Garland. I think Garland was one of the most corrupt attorney generals we've ever had. So anyway, let's go back to J6, and then I want to come back, if we could, to what this looks like going forward. Trump at his rally yesterday said that he would be issuing things very early on about J6 people. Now, we know there are several hundred in prison still, I believe. There have been some arrested just within the last few weeks.
Absolutely.
It's mind-boggling to me. So I would expect those people to be pardoned. I know that J.D. Vance has tried to be a little bit coy about certain people maybe being exempted from that. I don't know. I really don't know. We're sort of in uncharted territory. So I expect those. I would also expect the grandmothers and other mothers and other people who have been convicted of praying outside abortion clinics to be pardoned. There's going to be some big changes. It's going to take a little while for the policies to percolate through the Justice Department. And look, there are good people in the Justice Department. Okay. There are people who want to, see that laws are enforced. They're not all rogue prosecutors, but this goes back. So if you remember a few years ago, I actually did radio programs with some people about this, because the mythology arose within, I'd call it the right-wing conservative community, that massive numbers of indictments had been issued against people. And the numbers grew, and people did very poorly constructed. There's a database. You can always go and find the indictments once they're unsealed. You might go to a place, you might find the name, but the indictment is sealed. It's filed with the court, but it's filed under seal until the person is arrested, because you don't want to. So if you're representing someone who's under investigation for a crime, and as an attorney who's representing a person, you would know this, because there are grand jury proceedings and your client may be subpoenaed to testify in front of the grand jury or other people that are involved in the case. And you know this, but the grand jury proceedings are secret. And they do this because they don't want people to flee the country. So that's why when somebody is arrested on a federal indictment, one of the first things they do is they take their passport so they can't get out of the country.
Yep.
And they condition their bond. They put travel restrictions in. I mean, this is very, very common. I mean, I think who was the guy, the crypto guy, Sam Bankman-Fried? I think he had fled to the Bahamas or someplace and had to be extradited back. And people know, you'll see people they're Googling. I'm sure there are some people in Washington today that may not be getting pardons that are Googling where there are no extradition treaties and what the property values are in there and what the entry requirements are into those countries. So it's a very complicated procedure. So there are good people in the Justice Department. I don't want that to be overlooked, and they may be people that you disagree with politically, because I've dealt with them. I've dealt with people that were involved in very high legal levels within the Clinton administration and elsewhere, and we got along. I mean, they're good lawyers, but I've also dealt with guys like Andrew Weissman and stuff who I think are rogue, who are only in it for themselves. You have a guy like Jack Smith. I've never met him, but Jack Smith, who had to issue, they fought to it, they dropped all the charges and then they wanted to issue the report, which is very unusual. Yeah. And look, he will go into a private practice where he will make. If you're in D.C., I want people to understand is here in Ohio, you don't make that kind of money. You live a comfortable life, but you don't do like Bill Barr, who goes to Kirkland and Ellis and might make $5 or $6 million a year, making more in a year than a lot of us made in our entire career. So it's a very different world down there in DC and New York. And London, city of London, the big law firms there. It's a very, very much a different thing than what we experience here in the hinterlands of central Ohio. So anyway, Trump will issue these. We don't know it'll be interesting to see what comes out after noon today.
Right. And of course, again, when you said, just quickly before we move on, when you've said Merrick Garland, the most corrupt DOJ system that you've seen, and there has been, of course, others. Why do you say that this transition, sort of a minute, is a little bit bizarre to you?
Well, I've watched the involvement of Trump in the hostage deal between Israel and Hamas, and I know he was involved because he took credit for it. And we can talk about that. That's a whole nother can of worms. And I do want to talk about that a little bit because the images coming out of there are pretty troubling. So the world leaders have acted like Trump's the president almost since early November.
Absolutely.
There's been policy changes and that type of thing. And you've seen people become sort of bold in their positions and taking things on. The one person I think of comes to mind right off the top of my head is Giorgia Meloni in Italy, who is a populist. You see a rise of populist movements. And again, I'm a Bible prophecy guy and end times, and I do think we live at this very unique time of human history. So I factor everything into that, and people, I say, well, Trump's been elected. You have Giorgia Meloni. What do you think? You think this is slowing things down? And I'm just going to ask you. I mean, have you seen things that we talk about? They're going to unfold in the world according to the script by the prophetic scriptures. The answer is I've not seen anything slow down. Have you?
No. In fact, my dear friend, as we were even saying last night, we think that things are really, really speeding up.
somebody's stepping on the gas.
Yeah.
It's I started yesterday. I saw an interesting tweet from I think she's Lebanese, and of course she kind of has a Lebanese perspective, not pro-Israel to any respect, but she's a good analysis, and she said something about, is this the calm before the storm? And so I titled my update yesterday, "The Storm Before the Storm," because it's. I don't think we've seen anything yet. I mean, it's going to be very, very. The world's going to be very rocky. I think. I think I mentioned to you last night. I'm glad I'm 70 years old, because the envelope in which I might have to deal with this, depending on when the Lord decides to return, over which I have no control, is narrowing, which is in some respects a blessing, I guess.
I hear you. I'm not wishing you to leave us right now, because I think you have a heck of a lot to say, and you help out.
Well, let's at least get this posted, right?
Let's get this posted. Thanks, John. John, do you want to make some comments on the fact that there are certain YouTubers say things, they seem to get 5 or 6 million hits, and we're not upset about the fact that, well, we are upset about the fact they get 5 or 6 million hits, because we disagree with what they're saying. We're and this sea change, the sudden direction that they're changing, and I suppose we have to address our dear friend Candace Owen.
Yeah, so look, I think if you broke it down for me, I would call myself a Zionist. I do think that the Jewish people have a right to that land, to a homeland there. The world made that decision 75 years ago or more. It was formalized. The land was largely empty. But as Jewish people started to return back to the land, there was a concerted effort in the. I really wrestle with using the term radical Muslim community, because I'm not sure that what I observe is necessarily only radical. I'm not sure what non-radical Islam looks like compared to radical Islam.
Right.
I guess maybe it's just a difference in methodology. But so let's talk about this hostage deal, because that'll give us kind of an entry to what happened. So over the past week, there have been negotiations about a ceasefire in Gaza. They finally reached an agreement. It's multi-phase. And in the first phase of that agreement, Israel, the Hamas would release 3 female hostages.
Yep.
Israel would release 90 terrorists. Now think about that. And so I was up a good part of the night watching the videos that were posted. And you're a filmmaker, you know the power of the camera lens.
Yes, I do. Yes,
and what we saw was a staged piece of propaganda theater that took place. Now, first of all, if you look at the videos and you see these women being exchanged, first what happened was the people picking them up were told to go to the wrong place.
Yep.
That allowed them to accumulate hundreds, if not thousands, of people in a very small area where they were actually going to be released. The women were pawed at by men, and it was something out of central casting. So if you zoom back and look at the picture, you would see a big crowd, but in a very small area of all of Gaza. The way the videos look is, it looks like there's millions of people. There were probably thousands, The interesting thing too is I saw one reporter. She was taking off her press vest and putting on a Palestinian keffiyeh. And I think I could say this because, you know, I could stand to lose a few pounds. She really could stand to lose a few pounds. And her specialty was reporting on the famine in Gaza. And I go look at the people
Yes.
that are involved in this exchange, and you tell me with a straight face that there's a famine in Gaza. It is a complete thing of made up lies.
Absolutely.
And I looked at Candace, mentioned Candace Owens. I looked at her Twitter feed. It's all about famine and destruction in Gaza and people, and this was planned. And she's on a campaign, and she is a liar. She appears to be. I'm trying to be generous.
Yes, I hear
in
you.
saying that she appears to be mentally deranged. But I think it's deliberate. And I was looking at her feed this morning. Oh, look at this poor child. Look at this poor child. Look at this poor child. Never mentioning the Beavis children, who we don't even know are alive, but they're supposedly on the list of people that are going to be released over the next few weeks. And the way these things were, we didn't know if people coming out last night were alive or dead.
Absolutely.
The cruelty that is engaged in this, and I'm sorry, okay? I'll admit I voted for Trump. You know, I had a choice. Wasn't his advisor, who was involved in these negotiations, Steve Witkoff, said that Qatar was doing God's work. How is this even possible?
You mean the country that
The country
that backs terrorism? That they are doing.
They are the money bags for the Muslim Brotherhood. They are the money head of the Muslim Brotherhood snake, and that includes. If you look at the images of these hostages being released. I know that Gaza's been largely destroyed. I get that. But wait a minute. All of these guys on uniforms, it look like they just picked them up from the dry cleaners.
Absolutely. And John, isn't it fair to point out where you've this has been pointed out to me, where you've got vehicles, the Red Cross vehicles there. How often had the Red Cross actually visited these three hostages? Yes, exactly.
They had not visited, but they were there this morning.
Yes.
When the photo op was there. You know, a number of years ago, I was in Israel and we were traveling around with Joel Kramer, the archaeologist. By the way, get his book, Where God Came Down. You will learn a lot about biblical archaeology and the truth of what's talked about in scripture. But I sort of said in my kind of dry way as we're driving, his car was pretty dirty. And I said, you know, I don't take this personally, Joel, but I just was wondering, do they have car washes in Israel? And he kind of laughed. He goes, very funny. He goes, I don't wash it because then it's less likely to get stolen. And he was right. You know, every car you have a key, but you also have a little keypad to unlock the ability to start the car. It's like you got to punch in a code for every car, even a rental car, which we got. Yep. So these cars look like they just came out of a car wash. All of these cars bringing these hostages in. And go look. I mean, if you even zoom out and look at the big picture with the roads destroyed and all this stuff, where are they getting these clean cars from? By the way, why are the guys carrying not just AK-47s? They're carrying probably the best rifle used in the Egyptian military in many cases. It's clearly identifiable in the videos. Where did Hamas get all of those? Well, they got them through the tunnels coming through the Philadelphia corridor.
Yep.
So look, I think that while there have been a lot of people killed, they've reconstituted themselves. The tunnels are still there, and there's some indication that these hostages were brought from the northern part of Gaza. Now, they could have been brought through tunnels up to the northern part to make Israel look bad, like, oh, you guys, look, you're all over this area. You claim you've defeated everything, so we're going to bring the hostages from the north just to make a final point. So that remains to be investigated a little bit further. But suffice it to say, everything you see coming out of Gaza today is a propaganda video, and you see these people celebrating, passing out treats. You see celebrations throughout the Islamic world, Jordan,
London as well.
Oh, well, and that raises that's another issue I wanted to talk about, because there were huge celebrations in London, and not just celebrations, calling for genocide of Jews in London.
Yep.
And nothing happens to these people. Am I right? Is there if you wanted to build a case legally for two-tier policing or justice in the UK, Exhibit A would be what's gone on over the last 24 hours.
Well, it's as we're speaking on the Monday, there was a pro-Palestinian march on Saturday, and I believe that the Metropolitan Police made 70 arrests. Some of those arrests are linked with appalling signs that are, that they have had, and that some of those people then they're being arrested for having those signs, whether they're anti-Semitic signs, etc., etc. So I'm not defending the Metropolitan Police or the Mayor of London. I'm just pointing that out, that those arrests have been made. Certain arrests should have been made, or banning these marches, as far as I'm concerned, should have happened a long time ago. But John, you're making a very, very important point, which goes on to a load of other cases that we should discuss on another day. But I hear you. I mean, there were fireworks coming off buildings in London. At a guess, I'm trying to work out where that was. I'm not going to say that now. I have my own thoughts on that. But yes, those celebrations a few days ago were there, definitely.
Yeah, it's pretty. Everything is pretty troubling. I mean, I'm sort of looking at videos off to my left here of the release. Boy, unbelievable.
It's the amount of people need to understand. I know they do, but it's the amount of prisoners that are being released on the Israeli side to then get these hostages back. I mean, one of the girls is actually British, from South London.
And I watched her. I mean, I don't know which one, she could barely walk. As she went to the reunion with her parents. They had a video of her from behind her, and she was struggling to walk down the hallway. And they were given these parting gifts. Like, boy, someday a certificate of completion of 447 days or 477 days of yoga in hell or something like that. I mean, the cruelty is just unbelievable.
And they are masters of psychological warfare, and how you and I would feel if that was one of our relatives. I think we just have to state that. And we are also aware that there are still, I think, 60 hostages being held. We're concerned about whether they are dead or alive as well.
Well, there's still 95 hostages.
Right. Thank you.
But we're pretty sure that 32 or 3 of those are already dead. but we don't know which ones. I mean, this is the cruelty, the psychological warfare that's used.
But quickly
And,
going back to, I was going to say,
yeah.
quickly going back to a very important comment you make about when people are going on about genocide, and you look at those pictures, you've drawn attention to those pictures of people seeing extremely well fed, etc., etc. Let's just recap.
Famine and genocide.
Yes, absolutely. And also the people, the individuals that have actually been, that have been saying that. John, where do we go from here? You've made a reference to one of the negotiators, saying he's doing God's work. Do you want to make any other comment on the people that were negotiating in this incident?
Well, I'm concerned about the whole thing. I know friends of mine who live within the I guess you would call them settlements.
Yeah.
Are livid.
Yeah.
With respect. And so I'm trying to arrange an interview with Hillel Fold,
Right.
who is a tech guy in Israel, an activist, very, very good guy, though. His brother Ari was killed about 6 or 7 years ago. He lived in Efrat, and in fact, I was just down in Efrat 2 years ago, and I drove past the Gush Etzion Junction, where there's a shopping center there, and Ari had gone down there to pick up some things for his wife, for the house, for the home. And a kid came up behind him, stabbed him in the back, severed his aorta, then started going with the knife, and Ari chased him down and shot him, and then Ari collapsed and died. I think he was about 41 years old, 4 children. I watched the funeral. I did not know him personally. I had followed him for a long time. He loved Israel. He loved his family. There was tremendous joy that he had just traveling around his homeland that he had adopted, that he had moved to voluntarily with his family, raised his children there. I watched the funeral. I have very vivid memories of most of that funeral imprinted in my mind. The kid who stabbed him is on the list to be released. This morning released with this exchange was a guy who had, in fact, I need to find out I can't remember. There were a couple ladies that were attacked hiking through the hills. And the one lady survived, the other was killed. And there was at least one of the guys was fine. I don't know if it was this incident. It's hard to remember because there's so many incidents. He raped the one girl, and pretty much slit her throat, cut off her head. And he's released today, just a few years after he did this. So David Friedman, the U.S. ambassador, big bankruptcy attorney from New York, ambassador to Israel from the United States during the first Trump administration, said Israel needs to institute the death penalty so we don't have this constant exchange of cold-blooded terrorist killers in exchange for our innocent people. I can't say I disagree with that at all.
No, and I hear you. And it's uncomfortable to say because we have to remind ourselves that Sinwar, who oversaw the planning of the 7th of October 2023 atrocity, was in fact released out of Israeli prisons.
That was the Shalit deal back in 2011 or 2012. Yeah. So that he, by the way, he'd gotten a degree and learned Hebrew while he was in prison.
And he also learned the psychology even more of, I say this respectfully, of hostage taking, because he then understanding that within the psychology of the Israeli people, and I don't say that comfortably at all.
And
because,
by the way,
like,
I've seen the ones come out of prison today, and they're already shouting, "Go kill all the Jews."
yeah, and right. So, John, in the last sort of 10 minutes, any direction you want to take us in. But the other thing is how I'll ask you this. I've asked you this privately, but I'll ask it between our discussions. Have you seen anyone that has changed their mind, who would call themselves a Christian, who's changed their mind on this issue, that's gone from not supporting Israel, not understanding it from a biblical point of view, to then understanding it from a biblical eschatological point of view?
I've seen people. I saw an interview yesterday. I actually played a clip of it. It was on the Visigold 24 channel, and I apologize for not remembering the name of the individual, the lady that was being interviewed. She was a former member of Knesset, and she said, "I've been involved in this, for all my life." And she said, of all my time in Israel and active in politics and everything, I've seen 3 people from the Palestinian side change their mind that I'm aware of.
Right.
3 of millions. And I'm sure there are. I mean, this does happen. But, look, we've been engaged in a very concerted propaganda effort. For example, if you ask people who don't look at facts, like a Candace Owens or a Tucker Carlson, they will tell you that the Christians in the area of the West Bank are leaving because of Israel, but Israel doesn't control those areas. It is Palestinian Muslims who are persecuting Christians. So what happens is some Christians will adopt sort of an attitude of demitude, submission. And Islam's not that bad to us. We have a very good life under them. But they're really being persecuted and controlled. So you see that quite a bit. And so, yeah, look, there were Christians killed in the war in Gaza. Let's be honest about that. Okay. But there have been a lot of Christians who have fled the Middle East under oppressive Islamic Arab regimes. But nobody wants to talk about that. Nobody wants to admit that this is actually what's going on. And so I'm very troubled when I see a presidential advisor go to Qatar and come back and say Qatar is doing God's work. It's not God. It may be Allah. Carolyn Glick yesterday on our program interviewed the head of Memri. I can't remember his name. And the guy's written the book on Qatar. I mean, when Hania was killed by, I think Israel's taken credit for it, killed by Israel in an Iranian Revolutionary Guard safe house in Tehran. He was assassinated. A guy of the poor Palestinian, worth $4 billion, living in luxury in Qatar, monetizing the suffering of people in Gaza. When Hania's body was taken from Iran to Qatar for the funeral. Yeah. And there was the Emir of Qatar sitting in the front row at the funeral, listening to the rantings of an imam, a radical Muslim imam. And it's a little bit hard for us to wrap our heads around it, but Qatar money, Qatari money, been billions of dollars into American universities. Qatar may have the largest per capita incidence of slavery in the world. We have a base there, so we kind of turn a blind eye because we have an Air Force base or naval base there in the Persian Gulf.
Yes.
And Qatar spreads it around. So what you've seen, you've seen things like price at the checkpoint, which has completely duped people. I've been to a price at the checkpoint conference. I showed you a picture the other day of me sitting next to
Stephen Sizer
at lunch.
Yep.
And talking to some of this. I went to one because I wanted to know what these guys were thinking. And then Tucker interviews Gunther Isaac, who's sort of the de facto head, I guess, of that organization now, on his show, and he never challenges him or asks him a tough question at all. And then it just sort of normalizes that thought among people. Oh, well, I like Tucker. Tucker agrees with me on 95, on everything. And we'll just sort of let this one go. But it's always a propaganda piece.
But you've said an important thing. Sorry, I apologize. You've said an important thing, which is about going to events like that to find out what people who we don't agree with, what they actually think, and also to then try and engage with them to have a good, hopefully calm conversation. I think this is where we're at, where we're trying to engage with these people.
Yeah, I've referred to this many times in my talks. I actually went to dinner one night. There were two guys sitting across. This is Christ at the checkpoint. There were two guys sitting across from me that were obviously a couple, both wearing Palestinian keffiyehs. I think they were, quote, pastors in Colorado someplace. And there was two empty spots at the table. So I sat down. And, I'm sort of undercover. I don't know if I'm undercover, but I'm clearly not on board with what's being talked about in these sessions.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
Then the evening keynote speaker sits down next to me, and he is a Palestinian. I use the term Palestinian, even though that was really just sort of invented to apply to Arabs in that area in 1964 by the Soviet Union. But he sat down, and he's a cancer doctor, now lives at that time, this is back in 2018, lives in Toronto, Canada, but he had claimed, and I looked it up, I saw the articles, he had 3 daughters killed in an explosion, and I think a couple of nieces killed in an explosion. So listen, this is a very painful thing that he went through, but we don't know whether it was an Israeli strike or it was rockets falling short, which about 35% of them do, that are fired by Hamas out of Gaza. So anyway, I not his pain, but I asked him, I said, I've been around the Middle East. I've been in Jordan. I've been up in Nablus. And I've seen these refugee camps. And I'm like, for crying out loud, doctor, the war in 48 was 70 years ago. Why are these people still in refugee camps when there's luxurious apartments and homes around them? And just said, well, it's the occupation. I said, but why is it like this? Why is the squalor in Jordan? Why is the squalor in Syria? Why is the squalor in Lebanon in these, quote, refugee camps? Really just densely populated apartment complex. And he says, well, it was all the occupation. And it was very easy to sort of get him into a place where he had no intellectual ability to deal with the things that I was bringing up. All of this very, very, it's all very troubling. And so you'll see a guy like Tucker, you'll see Candace. I mean, look, I will say, let me just sort of predict what's going to go on with Candace Owens over the next few weeks. She's going to be very, very pro the Trump administration, but she's going to be putting out things. And I don't know. I mean, the whole shtick on her feed last night was the Jews killed Kennedy. The Jews were responsible for 9/11. And she's going to come out and do an interview with Michael Jones pretty soon, she says, who's one of the worst Holocaust deniers on the planet. I suspect that Holocaust Remembrance Day is in about a week. I suspect that she'll be dropping her Michael Jones interview about that for a synergistic effect. That's a guess. That's John Haller prognosticating and speculating. So
Well,
Don't
I
take
hear
it
you.
to the bank.
And John, I'm just conscious of time where I'm just going to have to wind down nearly an hour together, but I just want to thank you. We need to be doing this again, but I think it's fair to say that just asking people to pray in this situation, but also to have discernment. You've raised a very important point that's on my heart, and I need to talk to you about this because I sense that we do need a round table to discuss all of this and to put various things forward, and to say this calmly and to give the facts. I think this will be really important. John, thank you so much for your time. Just want to encourage everyone to pray about this. I'm also talking to myself. Please just reflect on before you become the keyboard warrior and fire something off. Just reflect on what you're about to send off. Check it out to see if it is true and to get those facts right. It's really, really important. But John, thank you. I'm just going to play us out, and I'll say goodbye to you on the other side. Take care, my friend.